everyone, and welcome to the One Soccer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Kareem Rae. Today, I'm excited to be joined by a special guest, Simon Evans. Simon, thank you for being here. To kick things off, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Kareem. My name's Simon Evans. I'm a soccer journalist. I've worked as a sports journalist and a soccer journalist for many years now. And I've been in the United States since 2007, where I worked for Reuters news agency covering MLS and soccer, but also doing other American sports as well. And traveled around, worked in Italy, worked in Eastern Europe, worked in the UK. Back here again, and I recently launched the Soccer Business, which is a newsletter focused on the North American soccer business.
Very nice. Simon, I'm super excited to have you on. Big fan of the show. I tune in to listen in to the guests that you're interviewing, and you have had on like huge individuals that have done amazing things within the beautiful game. So I'll just start off with my famous question is, how did you get involved in the beautiful game?
Well, I grew up in the northwest of England, where basically soccer's hard to ignore, hard to avoid, really, where you grow up there. I grew up in a small town next to Burnley. Burnley is the smallest town to ever produce a championship-winning team in England. They were champions of England in 1960-61. And they were also, the smallest team to get into the Premier League in that era, back in there now. So growing up in that area, soccer was just around you. You played it at school, you played in clubs. So I was, there was never any question about not being interested in the game. My dad was hugely into it as well. But professionally, I was working as a freelance journalist in Hungary, in Budapest, in the early to mid 90s. I'd left college. I was working out there as a freelance, writing for whoever I could about whatever I could. It was a really interesting time. I got a lot of great opportunities by being in an unusual place, as it was for the British media, and that meant that I was interested in football and soccer. So of course I went and watched the Hungarian league, and one of their teams got into the Champions League. And Reuters news agency at that time didn't have anyone covering the game out there, and they asked me to start covering soccer in Hungary. So that was a weird sort of start, really, and one thing led to another after that, really.
Absolutely. So why did you choose to get into journalism?
I'd always been interested in journalism. I think I studied political science at college at Newcastle University, and I had some ideas about going into politics. That kind of distracted me from journalism for a while. But I mean, going back to when I was a kid, I would, write match reports about amateur games. I would, write little fantasy articles for, imaginary newspapers that I made up for myself in the days before we had, any access to the internet or anything. I would make match programs. I was always interested. A local newspaper let me write reports on cricket. For the town newspaper, really. And then I did a few Burnley reserve team games as well, where you were sat in a almost empty stadium writing these reports, but you were in the press box, and that gave me a taste from it. And then, as often happens to people, going away to college, you get a lot of distractions. You also turn away from maybe the path that things were intended for you. So like I say, I got involved in political activism and studying politics and so on. But once I was out there and working in journalism, it just seemed the most natural thing in the world to go and interview a player and start writing about teams and so on. And I absolutely loved it. And I was able to travel then as well. And I co-authored a book, like a travel history book, if you like a half travelogue, half travel guide to European football, called The Rough Guide to European Football, which did really well. And that really was a turning point for me, from going from somebody who was writing these obscure magazine articles about, players in Hungary, but also the neighboring countries there. So I did a lot in Yugoslavia and Romania and Slovakia, Czech Republic, and so on. I became at that time a little bit of an expert in East European football for quite a few years. And I think it's interesting the way the media's changed, because I think if I'd have been doing that now, I'd have probably ended up starting a podcast about East European football. I'd have started a Substack about East European football. I'd maybe be writing for somebody like The Athletic or something like that, the occasional feature on a relatively obscure team in Eastern Europe or something like that. And I would have probably got really pigeonholed into that. But at that time, it was, you didn't have a brand as a journalist at that time. You just did what you did. So that for me was an opportunity. I sort of learned the trade out there. I was writing for so many different publications on my own, and you had to learn very quickly the different styles, the different expectations. I worked with I was very lucky to work with some experienced freelance journalists who were out in that part of the world who sort of gave me a lot of tips and advice and steered me along the way. So yeah, that was how it sort of evolved from kind of writing bar reviews and being an English teacher and doing the odd football interview. And it ended up going to the World Cup in 1998, having written a book and covering, big games at the World Cup for Reuters news agency. And after that, they said, let's get you out of Eastern Europe and how about going to Italy? So they sent me to Milan, and then that was the first time where suddenly you're in a different media world. I wasn't a freelancer anymore. I was a staff guy with Reuters, and I was covering AC Milan and Juventus and Inter and so on, and Ferrari Formula One team, and a lot of great stuff. So I was very lucky, and that was a fantastic experience in Italy. I had 8 years there covering Carlo Ancelotti's Milan. Um, Got to know some really great people in Italian football, and still have a lot of fondness for it.
Amazing. You've had m- like again like some huge guests on your podcast. I think most recently was I apologize for my pronunciation, guys. I think it's pronounced Real Ferdinand. You had Peter Moore, ex Liverpool CEO, and he's launched a club now in Florida. Um,
In
you
California, Santa
sorry,
Barbara, yeah, yeah.
California. Thank you. Alexi Lalas, Michael Hitchcock. So some very big individuals within the landscape of soccer or football. My question is, I mean, obviously you've been in the industry for a very long time, but how do you, for also for our listeners that want to get into podcasting or journalism, how have you been able to cultivate a network of high profile individuals as well as have them on your podcast now and continue to retain those relationships? And sorry,
Yeah,
and that I don't remember his name, but an individual from Rock Nation as well.
yeah, no, I think Michael Yormark. Yeah, it's look. I mean, when you've done the job in the media for pretty much 30 years, you build up contacts over time. The most recent interview I've done, which is coming out this week, is with Sunil Gulati, who was president of U.S. soccer for 12 years and who's been the forefront of the growth of the game in America. And of course, I've met Sunil many, many times over the years. I haven't done a big sit down interview like we did for the podcast, but, we'd meet at FIFA congresses, we'd meet at US soccer meetings, there would be press conferences he called, um, all kinds of things over the years where you get to know somebody like that. So they kind of know what to expect from you. Hopefully there's a degree of trust there. If you've written about somebody many times or quoted them many, many times, and you've always been fair to them, I think, or in the majority of cases being fair or objective, or any mistakes or honest mistakes, then I think you can build up that level of trust over time. It takes time. I think people starting podcasts, that is one of the difficulties if you haven't put in those years of work trying to get people. But once you build an audience, that can change, of course, because people are always attracted to a big audience, which a niche podcast like my own on the soccer business doesn't have a massive global audience or anything like that. So yeah, you do rely on knowing people and having those network of contacts.
Understood. How has media changed from your experience to from before, from the beginning stages to to today in 2025?
I mean, it's enormously changed. I think, if you go back to just in my time working in the media, I started writing articles, professionally, in the early 90s. And when I wanted to pitch a story to, the Times in London or someone like that, or the Guardian, even the pitching was an expensive thing because you were abroad. Picking up the phone and ringing somebody in London from Budapest in 1993 cost a lot of money. I mean, it was a factor when you were, a young reporter working on the very, very small margins and getting paid a small amount for your articles. You didn't want any expenses. So often we would send a fax. You'd send a fax through to the editor and hope that somebody puts it on his desk and he sees your pitch. And that was the way, you would go to people. I mean, there was no email, right? I mean, very quickly after that, email started to arrive, but not everyone started using it straight away. The fax was hanging around for a few years. So it was, that was completely different. How did you file a story? You filed a story often by fax. So, I was still involved at a time when you would dictate articles over the phone to a copy taker. I didn't have to do much of that, uh, but that was still there from the past. Very quickly it changed to filing by email or filing then on online systems and so on. And a news agency like Reuters had its own system that we sent stories through, but that was dial-up modems and stuff like that. So that's changed. The way of working has changed, but the way that media is distributed obviously is completely different. I mean, at that stage, news agencies, wire services were going on screens into media offices, and they were printed out and used in different ways. Um, and most of those clients were newspapers printing news that went out the next morning. But very, very quickly, the internet came along and all that changed, so everything's changed. We've been through the whole crisis really for newspapers of how do they go about, when people started getting used to having free content, how do they start charging again? For journalists, everyone started working in real time, which I think was an advantage for those of us who'd worked for news agencies, where you never had a tomorrow deadline. It was always a today deadline. It was always now. News breaks, you get it out as fast as you can for news agency. Whereas newspaper guys, a lot of them have been used to, get it in by 7 o'clock in the evening for tomorrow's paper. We never had to make that adjustment, but yeah, everything changed. Blogs came along. Social media's had like an incredible impact. The idea of breaking a story, somebody can break it on Twitter in before you've even picked up your pen. So, it's all changed radically as the technology and the internet has changed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I've never faxed anything in my life. I don't even know how to fax anything. So that's pretty cool. But obviously probably took a lot of time, right? You had to go fax it, wait for someone to put it on the tables, for someone to read it, kind of get back to you versus, like how we connected. I reached out to you on LinkedIn, you know, we went back and forth on email, WhatsApp, phone call, schedule the call. It's pretty quick, right? It's pretty instant. So do you think we're living in a time where there's too much technology? You're seeing AI now, aside from sport, but within, journalism and podcasting, do you think there's such thing as too much technology and AI?
I mean, a lot of people in journalism are worried about AI and fear it's going to take jobs. And I think it will take some. And I think it will have that disruptive impact. I use AI a lot, AI tools a lot in my work, whether it's, editing podcasts, whether it's putting together graphics or whatever. Also to collate my research and keep it together and do things, with like Google Notebook LM, which is absolutely fantastic resource for journalists to be able to keep all the clippings of articles about a given topic and then be able to dive into it and pull from it whatever you want and know it's reliable stuff because it's, things that you've put into it. I mean, obviously, people get worried that AI is going to, people newspapers are just going to ask AI to write articles. I don't think we're at that stage yet. I mean, it can certainly do some things very close to what some of the more basic forms of news agency journalism are. You know, turning a scorecard or a box score into a 5 or 6 paragraph short story. AI can pretty much do that now. Um, so those kind of, you know, if somebody was that was their main focus and their job, then they want to start thinking about how they might be able to want to do things a bit differently. But I think, generally speaking, you know, it's a way to speed up processes. It's a way to make things more efficient. I think it's great. I think podcasts are, you know, more broadly on technology. I think podcasts are absolutely fantastic format. I listen to tons of them. Um, I uh, I like being able to have access to long form conversations that people have, which, you know, the traditional media wasn't doing. So I think that's been a real positive. Social media, I think there is too much of it. But again, it's about being disciplined and knowing how to use it for what you want to do with it, whether it's building a brand or whether it's actually getting information and so on. Still extremely useful, I think. You know, I mean, for whatever people think about, you know, Twitter's transformation to X under Elon Musk, it's still a place where news breaks every day, you know. And if you're a fan of the US national team and you want to find out who Pochettino has called up in his latest roster, popping on Twitter is gonna get you the answer really, really quickly. So, and then get you a ton of opinions that you either want or don't want. But you know, I think overall the technology, you know, it is disruptive. It does require people to change the way they work and the way they read and consume media as well. But I think there's a ton of benefits in it all.
Absolutely. We got you're in Miami. We got Soccer X coming up next month in November 2025. Like so the first time I've been to Soccer X was back in 2023, which was good. 24 I went last year as well, was fantastic. It was at the Hard Rock Guitar Hotel in Miami.
Yeah, I was
And
there.
oh yeah, and 2025, this one's supposed to be a big one. I mean, they're hosting it at the Miami Convention Center. It's a way bigger venue, and it's going to be a big one. So my question is, will you be attending? And what are you looking forward to achieving at this year's Soccer X?
Yeah, I'll be there, and yeah, looking forward to it. It's always good to meet people in and around the business of the game. There's usually some good discussions there. It's a great networking event as well. It's interesting as well sometimes to have a look around. A lot of the startup businesses who go there and set up stalls and so on. I always go around and have a look. But above all, it's a networking opportunity, a chance to listen to people on the panels with their ideas, but also a chance to, you know, grab a cup of coffee with somebody you've been maybe communicating with by email or LinkedIn and sort of, you know, turn those casual connections into something more real offline. So yeah, I look forward to it. You know, I like those kind of forums.
Absolutely. Will you be moderating any panels or speaking?
It's possible, yeah, it's being discussed, but it's possible I'll be involved in that level. Yeah.
Got it. Next year, the 2026 World Cup. I mean, we just wrapped up. Well, actually, before the World Cup, I'm interested to get your thoughts. What were your thoughts on the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup?
I was quite involved in covering it. I went to a lot of games. I went to pretty much all the games in Miami and quite a few in Orlando. Um, I think we were lucky in Miami that we got with the games and the teams we got that we got mostly full stadiums. We got some great atmospheres when Boca Juniors came to town. I thought the football was good. Look, I get the discussions about, you know, too much football. I think there is too much football internationally overall. I do think there's a way that you can have a tournament like that and maybe cut back elsewhere, but I do think the game needs to have a long look at the overall calendar. So I get that criticism of it, but I thought it was a great tournament. I thought it was really great to see the Brazilian teams who, you know, over the years they've produced so many great players from Brazil, and they always, you know, go increasingly young to Europe But we still see good teams in the Copa Libertadores, and it's great to see. It was great to see them playing European opposition. Great to see MLS teams doing that. You know, they did a lot better than I feared. And I think you know, seeing Al Ali from Egypt turn up in Miami, where they had like, you know, 20,000 fans. I mean, no one knew where these people had come from, but it seemed like, you know, every Egyptian community in America had made sure they got to that game. Um, I thought that was fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it was a first edition. Did it feel like Chelsea became world champions at the end of it? Maybe not yet, but you know, give it a few more editions, and I think you know the teams will be fighting to qualify for that tournament. It made money. It's good for the club's profiles internationally, and I think it's here to stay. And I really like it. But the rest of the game does need to restructure a little bit to make sure that players can get enough rest.
So that game that you mentioned, that Egyptian team that played against Inter Miami. So I was actually down there in Miami for Confoot USA,
Right.
and I'm at the mall, the downtown mall with a few friends of mine, and they're like, "Let's go to the game." I had no plan; it was spontaneous. We ended up getting tickets. We went to the game, which was an amazing experience. First time at the Hard Rock Stadium, and they said there was about around 60,000 plus fans there. And to be honest with you, what I seen way more red jerseys than pink. And that's the first question I had was, where did all these people come from? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know they were like, I asked around, and there is apparently a big community of Muslims or Egyptians in Miami, but I was shocked because I'm half Egyptian through my mom, which was even
Really?
crazy.
Okay.
I didn't even know I didn't even know it was an Egyptian team playing. I thought it was a Saudi Arabia team. That's what my buddy told me. But yeah, no, it was just an amazing experience, and to see Messi and Suarez play, Jordi Alba, or shoot Busquets, it was amazing.
Yeah, and I think you know we saw these clubs having been at previous Club World Cups when it was a smaller 8-team tournament. You know, I'd seen Esperance from Tunisia when they held it in Qatar bring like 20,000 fans to it. A lot of these clubs around the world are way bigger than we realize. You know, Mamelodi Sundowns in South Africa. You know, there's just so many clubs around the world in the Middle East. Al Hilal, who beat Manchester City in that tournament. They've got a big fan base. Saudi Arabia has a long football tradition, long before the money started flowing into it. So, you know, I think that's one of the things I really like about the Club World Cup is it opens up people's eyes that there is more than just a local football, and there's more than just watching the Premier League or the Champions League. There's a lot of football around the world that can be really fun.
Absolutely. And that same club, that Egyptian club, had spoke a few weeks ago to an architect firm. I'm forgetting the name right now, but they're building a brand new stadium for that club, and it's massive.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing to see the game continuing to grow all around the world. With saying that, looking forward to seeing you at SoccerX this year, uh, and connecting in person. In regards to investments, we're seeing teams pop up right and left, specifically in the US. And I'm talking about the USL making tons of announcements of new markets that they're launching in. What are your thoughts on the landscape continuing to grow, specifically focusing on USL, with the announcement of promotion relegation, D1 Division One to compete with MLS, um, but USL announcing multiple clubs, and the private investment that they've just received from Bell Tower?
Yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? I mean, look, I think it's great that we're seeing a lot of interest in cities. I think Justin Papadakis was on your podcast as well as mine, talking about the 70 markets that they're talking to about having stadiums and clubs and so on. That's all great. The interest level is the first thing that you need, right? Before you go anywhere, you need people to want to have soccer clubs in their communities, and I think that's a major shift that's happened. Getting to the next phase is the tricky part, though, isn't it? You know, you've got to get the stadium built, and at the same time find an ownership who is willing to finance that stadium, but also finance a club for the long term. and to build a club that can engage with its community, have a fan base. Because what you don't want is a ton of clubs being formed and then folding in 1 or 2 years, which in the past has happened in USL. USL has lost, it's had a high turnover of clubs in the past. Thankfully, that tendency has slowed down recently, and we're seeing a growth, and we're seeing clubs, especially in USL 2 and USL 1, the amateur semi-pro sort of level. We're seeing the clubs like Vermont Green, Portland Hearts of Pines, these kind of clubs. But if they're going to grow and become professional clubs, they also need ownerships that have got the resources to build out bigger stadiums, get better quality players, pay the players more, be more professional. And then that's the same applies to the Division 1 element of it. It's a great goal and ambition to build a new Division 1 and have promotion and relegation, even if it would mean that I think the US looks kind of weird around the world in having 2 Division 1 leagues. I mean, it's just nowhere else in the world has that, really. I think India briefly did. And that ended up in some legal battles and FIFA getting involved and so on. But, why not? It's a big country. You could do it. In theory, I've got no problem with that. But what I want to see is, like, are we really going to have another 16 clubs, build 16 stadiums, or at least expand the existing ones? There's an awful lot of investment and work got to go in to turn that ambition into reality. And until that happens, then all the talk about promotion and relegation, which depends on having that Division 1, because I don't think USL wants to do it just between Division 2 and Division 3. That only happens if the Division 1 idea comes to reality. So, there's an awful lot to be done. And I think it's great. And I think in the newsletter on my podcast, we've kind of, talked up USL and we've said that it's doing really well. And I'm always happy to report news of, new stadiums and new clubs being formed and new deals being done and so on. But we also need now and then to have a little reality check and say, okay, well, what has actually been built? What is actually happening? We mentioned Santa Barbara Sky there and Peter Moore. Well, they just announced this week that they're delaying the start of their club by a year. They weren't able to meet their goal of starting next season. And for me, one of the red flags with some of these projects is when you see them announce in like July 2025 that we're going to start a team in February 2026. I'm like, really? You're going to give yourself 8 or 9 months to go from scratch to having a professional soccer team on the field in a professional stadium? Those are red flags. So I'd like to see a little bit more realism as well. It's great that there's this sort of buzz around USL. It's all positive. But, if I was investing or looking to get involved in USL, I would also, take a reality check on some of it.
Absolutely. With saying that, they did announce publicly they're pushing for Division 1 to be launched 2028. Do you think that's a realistic timeline?
Probably not. No. I mean, that gives them practically 2 and a bit years. I mean, maybe, if the money's all there and all these cities are ready to go and build stadiums in the next 2 years, but it's a big ask, so they could have half the championship go up to that top division and improve their facilities. And then you only need to have maybe half a dozen new teams come online. Then maybe, I'm not dismissing it, but it's very ambitious. And it was certainly, when it was being talked about, 2027 seemed to me, highly unlikely. 2028 maybe gives them more room, more time to do it, but we'll see. I mean, what I do think needs to be said as well, when we talk about things like competing with MLS, I don't think that's what it's about at all, really. I don't think anyone's going to be in a position to compete with MLS. They've had 30 years of growth and investment. Millions, billions have been invested in MLS, in these stadiums and in these clubs, and building up fan bases so that they're getting crowds in the 20 odd thousand. USL clubs are happy if they can get 5,000. That's where they are at the moment, most of them, with a few honorable exceptions. And so, just keep building, keep doing things. That's what I think. I don't think anyone seriously thinks they're going to compete with MLS. there's plenty of places where there aren't MLS teams and never will be MLS teams probably. So, go and build, do your thing. But I don't think, I mean, I've had people sometimes like international readers of the newsletter say, wow, what do you think about this USL challenge to MLS? And I don't think it is a challenge to MLS. You know, I just don't. I think it's a separate thing. Build it, make it happen, make it work, and then let's see where we are.
Understood. Do you see MLS launching a Division Two league?
Not in the immediate future. No, I mean, they've got a third division league, obviously, in MLS Next Pro. I think as they start to add more and more independent clubs and less reserve team or rebranded reserve teams, a possibility opens up, doesn't it? I mean, I think if these clubs coming in, these independent clubs, you look at what's happening in Michigan, in Grand Rapids, where an ownership group has come in and they're spending $170 million to build an 8,500 capacity stadium for MLS Next Pro, a third division league. Do you think that ownership group maybe has ambitions of playing at a higher level than third division? I think they possibly do, and you see some of the other clubs that are going to come online. I mean, Cleveland will eventually have an MLS Next Pro team as well as the women's team they're starting in the WPSL Pro. And so, you know, Cleveland is a potential Division One market. So are they going to want to be Division Three all the time, or would they like to see it become a Division Two? I think that might be something that's down the line, but I don't think it's imminent.
Sure. What are your thoughts on, Bell Tower investing into private investment into USL? I mean, it's USL's first investment received at a league level.
Yeah, no, I think it's huge news for USL. That's great news. I think it shows that the work they're putting in has attracted serious, incredible people towards them. And I don't think it's just Bell Tower who's been impressed by the plans they've put in place. Now they've got to use that money wisely. There was a time in history when MLS needed capital investment like that, and they used it very wisely to help develop their clubs and to make sure they started to get stadiums and training facilities and academies and so on. So it's all about, using that money wisely and having a plan for it, which I'm sure they have. But yeah, I mean, it's tremendous news for USL to start getting an investment like that in the league. What we also need to see is the clubs getting investments like that, because it's the clubs that are losing money, not the league. Yeah. So, they need to start attracting investors in there and a different level of club owner if they're going to do all those D1 things that we've just been talking about.
Sure. Pivoting gears here, um, you're in Miami. Messi's in Miami. You're close by. Messi has done a lot for the MLS. A lot of people would say, what would you say the Messi impact has had in Miami MLS?
I mean, in Miami, it's really changed the club completely, in every possible way. So, in terms of the revenue they're able to generate, the attendances they're able to get, the general awareness in the community of the team has been utterly transformed, and has been worth every penny that they've spent for that club. And they need to focus now on this next phase of trying to ensure that the last couple of years of Messi's, if the extension to his contract does get signed as we expect, that they use that time to then transition to post Messi in a way with maybe a younger team around him and with some newer stars coming through so that when Messi retires, there isn't suddenly this black hole, you know? Um, for the league, I think it's been great in terms of its profile and reputation. It's really helped, I think, with the broadcaster Apple to have someone like Messi to build out that product as well. And it helps the credibility globally of MLS, I think, to have Messi playing in it. But you always want more, don't you, as a soccer fan? And I think people would love to see, every team in MLS have a Messi, not Messi caliber. You can't do that, but top quality international players come in, and it's getting better and better. But No, I think it's been hugely positive. I mean, I wish he was like a little bit more outgoing guy and did more TV and more promotion and media and stuff like that and talked to journalists more often. He's just not that kind of guy. Um, but yeah, no, I think it's been huge for MLS.
Yep. We got the 2026 World Cup coming up next year, the 2028 Olympics in LA, potentially a 2031 Women's World Cup hosted potentially by the US. What kind of impact does this have for the growth of soccer in the US?
I think these big events always have an impact, don't they? I mean, you go back to 1994, and obviously that had a huge impact on the women's side. Earlier than that, the World Cup being held here, the success of the women's Olympic team. These big events, Americans love the big events, and it's only going to generate interest in soccer. The concern is, does it generate interest in domestic American soccer and Canadian soccer and Mexican soccer that is reflected in increased attendances, increased TV audience, and then the knock on of bigger broadcasting deals and bigger revenue deals and sponsorship and all the rest of it? Or does it just create a bigger audience of fans of international soccer within North America? More people watching the Premier League, more people watching the Champions League. That's where they've got to be really active and smart, I think. All the leagues, all the properties in the market. How do you capture that casual new soccer fan that's going to come along in the World Cup? And when it finishes, they don't just switch on their TV now and then to watch foreign soccer, but they get buying a season ticket to go and watch their local team in whatever league it's in. So that's the challenge for everybody in the market, I think. The fan engagement piece is absolutely central to all of it, and people have got different ideas about how to go about it. And I'm curious to see how that's going to play out, because the opportunities, if it's done right, are huge. And the sense of missed opportunity, if it's not done right, will also be huge, because the soccer market in America is not going to get smaller. The young people we see attracted to the game who are walking around wearing soccer jerseys in all the major cities in North America, you and I see that all the time, right? I mean, but we want them to be wearing MLS or USL jerseys or NWSL jerseys. We don't want to just see loads more Barcelona and PSG jerseys, and more Real Madrid fans. That's the challenge, and that's the difficulty as well, because it is tough. Because let's be honest, the quality of the leagues in Europe is much better than it is in North America, and it's very hard to convince people to follow, be engaged with, commit to, and spend on what on the field is an inferior product. But there's so many other benefits you can get from being a fan of your local club that outweigh, in my opinion, that gap on the field. The sense of belonging, the community, the camaraderie you get with your fellow fans, the fact that you're able to support something in your community, it's nearby, it's accessible. I think it's yours, and Burnley. When I started following Burnley as a kid, they were a fourth division club for many of those years. Terrible team, playing in front of really small crowds. But we did it because it was ours. We supported them because it was ours. And that connection has to be built, and it's hard. It's not easy. People can come up with all kinds of decks and PowerPoints about how you might be able to do it, but there's a lot of hard work has to be done to capture those people and turn them into American and Canadian and Mexican soccer fans, and not just international fans.
100%. I think I see more yellow Cristiano Ronaldo jerseys and probably more so pink Leo Messi jerseys at the mall. Kids running around playing soccer. So that's a great point. And it was super important to me to have these jerseys behind me that were gifted by individuals that we've had on the podcast to show our support to local clubs in the market versus international. So 100% agreed. I think you hit it on the nail at the head on the head on that one. Um, and yeah, it's not easy to do what these clubs are doing, and leagues. Um, with saying that, a topic that has my interest of when I've I think the last event I was at was the New York, down in New York World Football Summit event, which was a bit more intimate and focused versus the big ones that they do. And a topic of discussion was, for the World Cup was Donald Trump, right? And there's so much stuff going on in the US. And for people internationally, could be scared potentially to come to the US due to what is the logistics going to be around that. Are people going to be able to get visas to come in, go out, et cetera, et cetera? Just, around those things can have an impact on the experience of individuals coming to the US. Curious to backtrack to what it was like for the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup there. I mean, because Trump was in office that time, and what does it look like for the 2026 World Cup?
Well, I mean, the 2025 Club World Cup, we had stories about how ICE might be running around stadiums, capturing people and dragging them out of the stadiums and kicking them out of the country. I don't think that happened, did it? I mean, there was a lot of scare stories, I think, around that kind of stuff. What is I think a much more serious concern is the visa situation that you highlighted there. I know that there has been a focus in the working group that FIFA and the US government have set up together to try and get that process speeded up. And you really hope that works, because what you don't want is, people coming from South America or wherever who want to come and want to have a time of their lives here, not being able to make that journey. That would be really, really not what the World Cup's all about. So hopefully they get that sorted. I think once they're here, they'll have a great time. I mean, I think people did at the Club World Cup. I mean, for all those stories, like we were saying, I think those Egyptian people in that stadium had a great time. I don't think anyone was worried. I think there's a bit of political scaremongering went on around that tournament, and I'm sure happens before every big tournament wherever it's held in the world. You get these kind of politically whipped up stories as well, and I'm sure that'll happen as we get closer to 2026 about whatever issues come along. But I think from what I see, I mean, I don't follow the that kind of stuff particularly closely, but from what I see, Trump is kind of like wanting to make the World Cup part of his thing. He wants it to be a success. So, the idea that Trump would like ruin the World Cup by doing some crazy stuff during it, I don't know. I think his what he wants is to be there at the final and declaring it the greatest World Cup ever or something like that. No, that would be what I would expect he'd want to do. So hopefully that means that they do get things like visas sorted out, and also, the local organizers, get all the public transport situations sorted out for every stadium so that, people can easily get in and out of these venues and so on. So, the logistics, but, Americans are usually pretty good at this stuff, and Canadians, you know, I think it's a country that they're both countries that get things done. So, I'm pretty confident it'll be a good World Cup.
Yeah, agreed. Um, do you think FIFA did a good job with the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup?
I think there's a few things they could learn from with it. I think the dynamic ticket price thing. People were a bit unsure what to expect at the start, but the ticket prices went down because the demand wasn't there. So actually, in a strange way, although there were a lot of negative stories saying, "Oh, look, you can get a ticket now for $20. No one cares about the Club World Cup." Actually, was the dynamic ticket process working and making it cheaper and filling up stadiums. So I do think there's going to be, with it being a 48 team World Cup, there are going to be some games that are going to be really hard to fill stadiums for. I mean, if you think about some of the teams who might qualify, there's a lot of teams there that aren't going to attract a neutral fan very easily. And if they're playing in NFL stadiums, if you have something like Jamaica versus Uzbekistan in the Cowboys Stadium in Dallas, you're going to get 80,000 people to go and watch a game like that to fill it. That's not going to be easy. But I think having those empty seats at the Club World Cup probably gave FIFA some food for thought about how they might go about doing that.
Yep. Um, I want to transition to the business side. Um, you know, when I look back and I say, hey, where did most of our guests come from? It's LinkedIn and emails. How important are you using any other platforms to share your content on, aside from like the normal, like, I mean, in my perspective, like Instagram, X, LinkedIn, YouTube, and newsletters? Is there any other unique platforms you're using? And I'm going to do a two in one. And aside from that, how important is LinkedIn to your business model of generating leads and having guests come on to the podcast?
Yeah, so primarily it's a newsletter. We do have an Instagram account. YouTube, we've played around with and sort of taken a pause on that one a little bit because I don't think it's the right platform for a business podcast. Personally, certainly not for ours. I don't think it's going to attract. I help with some friends of mine. We have a podcast about Burnley. Yeah, like a weekly. We do it a couple of times a week, group of journalists, ex-journalists who are all Burnley fans, and we do this podcast, and it's been pretty successful. It's become the main sort of Burnley podcast, and YouTube has been absolutely fantastic for the growth there because we did it as audio only first, for about a year and a half, nearly 2 years, and then eventually we took we're all guys with bald heads and waistlines and guys in our 50s and stuff. We were like, no one wants to be looking at us on YouTube. But we were reluctant to do it. But when we went online and did it, we tripled our audience. And we found new fans of all, from all kinds of demographics. And it's been hugely successful. So I can totally see why people would use YouTube. I just think for our podcast at the moment, we had a lot of interest in the Rio Ferdinand episode, of course, but I think most people, our readers and listeners and people who are part of our network, I think they listen to our podcast when they're on a commute or they're going out for a walk with their dog or they're driving, or they're doing some chores around the house. I don't think they're sitting down with their family on the sofa on the smart TV to watch a discussion about USL expansion or something like that. So I don't think it's the right platform for us now. Maybe that'll change, but so for us, we use audio platforms for it. Newsletter. Is newsletter, direct to email newsletter. That's it. LinkedIn is everything. LinkedIn is absolutely everything. That's where it started. That's where my idea came from. I was posting about soccer business topics on LinkedIn, and the level of interest in what I was putting up there was just so huge. The network that built was so fast and broad that I thought, maybe there's something more here. Maybe a newsletter would be useful rather than just posting things on LinkedIn. So that's why it started. So, yeah, is that a business plan? I don't know. It's, could be maybe, but eventually, but it's certainly something that's worked for us, LinkedIn. I think it's fantastic platform. I think the algorithm for LinkedIn works better than any other social media I've used. If you go on Twitter and post about something, the chances that somebody who's interested in that topic will see it if they don't follow you is pretty small. But on LinkedIn, you post about Charlotte FC Stadium or something, and pretty soon somebody from Charlotte FC will see that. And then a journalist in Charlotte will see it, and then an investor in Charlotte will see it, and then a fan will see it, and all kinds of things like that. So I think it's a fantastic platform. And would it work for all businesses? I don't know about that, but from what I see, that network effect that it has through the algorithm should work for, I think, pretty much any startup. I think it's fantastic. I really do.
Absolutely. Last two questions. You've covered everything from FIFA scandals to World Cup triumphs. How do you balance telling great stories while also digging into the politics and business behind the game.
Yeah, I mean, with soccer business, we're not doing much of the politics. I don't want to do that. I did years and years of covering like FIFA and UEFA politics and CONCACAF scandals and all the rest of it. Um, Personally, I'm a bit jaded of doing that stuff. I find the business stuff much more interesting. I think what business people want, yes, there are things where you come across things that you want to dig a little bit deeper and find out what's going on. I think people want actionable intelligence about the market that they're operating in. So what we're trying to do with the soccer business is build a soccer business intelligence service rather than a news service, really. So I've got other things I do as well, so I'm not in a position to be like, rushing out breaking news on a Tuesday morning or that kind of thing. It's once a week we put out the newsletter, once, maybe twice a week when we start our new news podcast as well, where we'll review the news with a panel of us. So for me, those kind of other stories, other people do it better, and I think what we can do better than other people is provide that kind of actionable intelligence.
Understood. Simon, what advice would you give to the next generation of journalists?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked this number of times. People contact me on LinkedIn, and also, friends who work in journalism training every now and then ask me to talk to students and stuff. And I always say the same thing, which is that you've got to be multi-skilled. You've got to be, you've got to combine having lots of different skills and ability. It's not enough just to be able to write these days most of the time, unless you're absolutely outstanding writer. I think you've got to be able to talk on podcasts. I think you've got to be able to do social media well, or at least competently. You've got to have all these skills, but then at the same time as being generalist with your skills, you need to be really niche with your focus, I think, because it's very, very difficult to make a career and build a career, I think, as a general sports writer, for example, or if you're doing politics, just a general political reporter. There are jobs out there for those, but they're extremely competitive. And I think you see people building successful careers when they find a niche, become a real expert in it, bury down, and then don't be afraid to maybe pivot later in your career and go into another niche or another area. I'm not saying you have to decide that you're going to be a women's soccer reporter at 25 and do that for the rest of your life. Of course not. But I think having those range of skills so that you can be flexible when the technology changes, AI comes along, have you got the skills to cope with that change in the marketplace? But also, are you building your, I mean, I used to laugh and hate this phrase personal brand for journalists because it kind of goes against the grain for journalists who don't want to be the story and you know, your job is to write the story and present the information, not to be about yourself. But there's no way of avoiding it in today's world, I don't think. So, you see journalists having to go on podcasts and talk about things. Well, be good at that then, be good at these different things. And the technology helps, man. I mean, there's so many easier ways to do these things than ever before. I mean, I did a podcast years ago when, there weren't that many podcasts around, and piecing it together using some of the, software that was available at that time was really painstaking work, and it was really difficult, putting everything together and then distributing it was, also an issue. Now, I go on Podbean and it distributes it to every audio platform with one click, so going back to that technology thing, things have never been easier for people to be able to build out kind of niche products, I don't think. And your video can go on social, it can go on YouTube, you can chop it all up. And guess what? You don't even need to chop it all up because there's programs will do that for you, And the software we're using on this show right now, you can go into it and edit text and it edits the video automatically. It's amazing how much stuff there is out there. So learn all this stuff, be open to all of it, but, journalistically find some areas that, yes, it has to be a niche, but be a niche you are genuinely passionate about. Because if you're not, you get caught out, yeah, and it becomes a chore. People tell you can tell you're not really an expert, and they can also feel if you're not into it. So it's got to be something that you genuinely are passionate about and care about. And I could talk to my friends for an hour in the bar about USL. I might bore them to death, but it means that when I do a podcast or something, I talk about USL, people can tell, I think, that I do care about what's happening in club soccer in the United States. And that's the secret to it, I think. Find those things. So if you're really into golf, go into it massively. Get into golf, but find your niche within golf as well. Maybe it's women's golf, or maybe it's players from a certain country playing on the PGA Tour. I know somebody who did that, so there's loads of different ways of going about it. But yeah, be a generalist in terms of your skills and be a specialist in terms of your knowledge and focus.
Simon, thank you for sharing that advice. Thank you for taking the time for being on the podcast. Once again, I truly appreciate you taking the time for joining us on the One Soccer Nation podcast.
No, well, thanks for inviting me, and I've really enjoyed talking with you, Kareem. It's been great.